Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. It is 9:06 a.m. This session is set to go until 10 a.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110 for public virtual attendance. You may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. Carolina Mejia joining you via Zoom for the moment. Vice Chair Ty Menser in the boardroom and Commissioner Gary Edwards in the boardroom as well. We also have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell and Assistant County Manager Rob Gilder is there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And today we're going to be discussing the procurement and IT policy review briefing. And this was a briefing that I requested due to some tendencies that I saw happening, and I think it would just be a good refresher. I'm going to pass it to the county manager.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As you stated, at your request, but this is really a good opportunity for the board to have a refresher on the high level of the procurement policy the board adopted. And also, we'll walk you through some of the key elements, and at the end, we'll touch base on some potential changes that we need to address as a result of recent legislation that it passed. So, and that will maybe come into your attention in 2024. So with that in mind, we have Sherry and Rebecca here. So we're gonna load the presentation. You can introduce yourselves.
I'm Rebecca Kirby, the Procurement and Contracts Manager.
Sherry Ild, IT Director.
Begin?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to present the current procurement policy process and required approvals and countywide training plan. And then also some next steps.
These
Okay.
Okay. Oh, I said those things,
Okay.
so we can go on to this one. So the next few pages are the very detailed process of what it takes for each type for processing procurements and contracts. So we're not gonna focus on these, but we're gonna go to the high-level views.
So before you just zip past them though, we just want the board to have these so that you can see how many steps are involved in the procurement process. And you'll see that depending on what the item is, it's got a certain path, there's things that offices and departments are supposed to be doing. We're hoping to automate a lot of this with the ERP, but basically we have a flow chart for what it takes to purchase any type of item from the point where someone says, hey, I think I need a whatever, to payment. And that's what each of these flow charts is. So we're not, as Rebecca said, we're not gonna spend any time on them, but we wanted you to see that there is a process, a well thought out process that goes with each of these areas. Take it away.
So the first high-level policy reviews of Public Works, and then the approval process currently for less than 40,000 department director elected official, 40,000 to 350,000 department director elected official, and then larger than 350 board approval.
These, back to Public Works, I guess I'm gonna say a little more about each of these.
Okay, do you want?
So with the approvals, you see dollar amounts that are set, certain limits. Those are set by either state or federal law, depending on what kind of money we use. So if we're using federal funds, we have certain things that we have to do. And one of the things you have in your packet is this attachment that breaks it down even more. But the dollar amount dictates the level of approval and the type of bidding process that we have to follow specifically for Public Works. You have any questions about Public Works?
Yeah, and just so you'll know, on the attachment, the top row here will break down the federal dollar limits on your separate attachment.
Yeah,
So you can see how it varies from
they're different.
the dollars.
We have sent a request to the state to please align their rules with federal rules. It would make it much easier for everybody, but as it is, we have to know what kind of money we're using so we follow the right process.
So when you say public works, do you mean, and then the next one, for example, says materials, supplies, equipment leases. So if public works needed an equipment lease, are they public works or are they equipment lease?
That is a great question. This is not Public Works, the department.
Okay.
This is what's considered a
Definition.
public work.
Okay.
So
Definition of public.
construction
So I was
mainly.
guessing, so
Yeah,
it's
something
not referring to our
public
department.
facing. Nope, it's not about the department. It's about what is it you're buying? And
Type of
public
work.
works are normally construction.
Then public work, includes prevailing wages, and all that is a lot of requirements goes associated with the definition of public work. And also, we use, in this case, you see, we use the small works roster. The county used to maintain a small works roster, maybe 7 years ago, past. And it was a little labor intensive. Now we have reached out, we rely on the MRSC for a small works roster. And that seems to be a very well thought out. And I think the MRSC is ramping up the small works roster for all the jurisdictions to access, and that is a good tool.
They are, that's what's gonna be the 2024 change.
Roster of what?
So for instance, a small works, let's pick, I'm gonna use this, we just need to have our carpenter do some work on a facility, county facility. We don't have our carpenter that is licensed, bonded, that we can reach out. But MRSC has a list of those carpenters who have submitted their documentation to qualify to provide those services to any organization. So that is the key. So we avoid a lot of going through determining and vetting the process of an individual or an organization using the MRSC because they have done that already.
So it's a list of vendors and the list says what the vendor does or what they specialize in. And instead of having to go out on a RFP and do a full-blown RFP process, if the project meets certain dollar thresholds, instead you can go to the roster and contact only those companies who have signed up and are on the roster and do a much simplified bidding process. You can contact them, ask them, are you interested in this project? And get quotes from them. So it, as Romero said, it is a much streamlined process for small projects.
And the state government recognizes MSRC as a legitimate.
Absolutely does, yes.
Yeah, even on Department of Enterprise Services, they have that on their website.
Yeah, and in fact, DES used to have their own small works roster, they went with MRSC.
Thank you for the clarification on all of this. Yeah, I was confused about the public works part for sure. So, Commissioner Edwards, I'm sorry, I skipped you. Do you have any questions, sir?
Yes, so how does our policy or this activity cover the leasing of real property that are buildings, for an example?
So our policy does not specifically cover how to obtain a leased building. It does talk about leases, mainly leases of equipment. And when it comes to real estate, there's a completely different process that we follow. We have a realtor that we contracted with based on a RFP, and then we go through a process with our realtor. But the policy itself, our county policy does not speak to obtaining real estate. It does talk about leases, mainly equipment.
Well, I'm looking at our policy here and it does say, one of the bullets, purchasing any goods or services by the county.
That's right.
And another bullet is leasing real or personal property by the county and contracts for public works. So isn't this, using this building as an example, isn't this real property that we'd have to bid on?
No,
No, okay. And I guess why, if no, why not? How's the process work then?
Because it's not unusual. I think what you're talking about, Commissioner, is the tenant improvements of this building.
Well, probably
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're talking about, if I may. And the tenant improvements of this building is inclusive of the lease the board signed.
Is what?
Inclusive of the lease
Okay,
of this building the board approved. Every single lease of any facility, the departments do not have authority to approve. The board is the only one who has the approval authority to exercise any lease of any facility for public use. Within any lease is not unusual that we are including tenant improvements as part of the lease process. And the tenant improvements, there is two options. Whether the organization can pay the lease ahead of time, so it's not included on the monthly lease, such as this building. Or perhaps we include the tenant improvements within the overall monthly lease, which is contemplating in doing on the field operations office in Tumwater for the sheriff's office.
Okay.
And we have exercised that in the past.
right. And we have an opinion from our attorneys that the process we used
Yeah.
was legal and appropriate
Because,
and just to have
for this
an
building as example.
like, we built a fence around a parking area over here.
We did
How
not
did
build
that
that
happen,
fence.
or what process took place there?
So we do not own that property. We did not build that fence. The
property owner.
landlord built the fence and the landlord followed. Because let's say that is a public work, it is a small public work. They paid prevailing wage, and beyond that, those are the only rules that a private party has to follow.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't bid that contract, it's the property owner.
All right, so let's move to the next section.
Okay. Materials, supplies, equipment. Did you, I mean, we kind of covered that too, so I moved on past that one.
Touch base a little bit more.
Okay, so for the approvals, less than 10,000, department director or elected official. And then same for 10,000 to 50,000, and then larger than 50 is the board approval. So bidding is not required under 10,000, but 10,000 to 50. Use the county official vendor list, which is MRSC. And obtain phone or written quotes from 3 vendors, and then 50,000 or more formal bidding.
Yeah, I'll just try to come up with an example. So that I asked you about the plants. Might that fall under this category? You know, you.
The plants,
Plants and put in, yeah.
so they do fall into this category, yes, they do. The plants were less than $10,000.
Right.
So we did, oh no, they're gonna be, all in all, they'll probably be a little over 10.
You did 3 quotes.
We got 3 quotes. They're within my signature authority. And we went with the lowest bidder.
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning anything. I'm just using that as an example. So
Well, and
I
I'm
have a little
telling you
better
how that
understanding of how
example
it works.
fits.
Okay.
Yep,
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to think of something for each one of these that I can ask. I
that's
mean,
great.
'Cause I don't, because I really don't, this is good stuff for me.
No, perfect. This is really the intent of this briefing, just to bring a little bit of refresher
Mhm.
to the board on procurement policy.
Great. So no, it's a great example, and that's how it fits in this policy.
So on the award section, soliciting office or department to responsible bidder with the lowest responsive bid. in the less than 10 and then also with the 10 to 50,000. And then larger than 50, the board is responsible for awarding to the bidder with the lowest responsive bid. The board may delegate the signatory. So on the procurement policy, I apologize, this is not supposed to say goods, just services. So these are a little bit different rules, less than 10,000 department director official for approvals, and then 10 to 50 department director elect official, and then 50 is the board approval. Bidding is not required under 10. 10 to 50,000, use the county's vendor list, again, that's the MRSC, and obtain 3 quotes. And then over 50, formal bidding is required.
Maybe following Commissioner Edwards' approach, what will be an example of services that we may procure?
Well, perhaps Commissioner Edwards has something
No,
for an
I
example.
don't, I'm just ones that I was able to
A
come up.
recent example of goods and services is the contract that we just signed with Strategies 360. That is only a 4-month contract, so it's 20,000 plus expenses. That puts it in the category of 10 to 50,000. Where we should have gone out for quotes, and we met with 2 of the two appropriate vendors, and I think a third one was contacted. Even with the quotes that we received, we came to the board because for services, there's an exception that's not listed specifically, but it's in attachment A, where the board can waive the bidding requirements for services, specifically professional services. So we brought that to the board, asked you to waive those requirements so that everything was clean. And you did so, and at that point, I can sign the contract and go forward. Other types of things, go ahead, Sherry.
Well, we just did the services, the contract with Experius for
Right,
our contractor to help us with the ERP. That was over 50,000 and it was supposed to get bids, and I brought it to the board and you guys waived that requirement.
right, so we could get the experienced person. Kind of
The
good.
ERP contract too, what's, I forgot.
Software. No, it's software.
I
Yeah,
meant the vendor
Oh, the
that's
vendor,
helping.
yeah, the vendor.
yeah, something, well, that's not a bad example. The ERP project itself had a huge formal bidding process where we spent months gathering the requirements to put in the RFP. We spent quite a bit of time selecting the vendors, narrowing it down, determining who best fit. That was not awarded necessarily on the lowest bid. Low bid is not the driving factor for goods and services, but rather you select someone that's gonna best fit the project and can meet the needs of, which is why it's so important for goods and services to lay out the requirements that you need, because you're gonna select a vendor that can best meet your needs.
Yeah, and the board approved yesterday as an example, the employment services at the jail. That's since that is beyond the 50,000, they're going through a formal request for proposals.
Right.
That request for proposals is where you outline the requirements as Robin stated, so they can go through the process, selecting the right outfit that can provide the specific services. That's another example of services.
What is, so I understand services versus goods, but what is goods versus supplies or equipment on the 2 different slides?
That's what I was saying, I apologize, that one, this one that says services should not say goods. This really, I mean, this is, the materials, supplies, and equipment are a form of goods.
Okay, so the slide 9 is more about services,
Yes,
but it looks almost identical in terms of the boxes. What's different about 9 versus 8 in terms of the substantive in the boxes?
well, this is where he was saying that we have a specific set of requirements that the vendor needs to meet, and it's not driven by the lowest cost. We just need, they need to meet the county's specific needs, and so,
Doesn't say that on these slides, so.
what's that?
So on the materials, supplies, equipment and leases, you'll see that under the awards section,
Yeah.
we have to go with the lowest responsive bid. It's the low bidder rule.
You know, we do
On
services.
services, we do not need to go with a low bid.
Okay.
We go with the bidder that
Meets the
best meets
requirements.
our needs. Sherry, where does is IT on the next slide?
It's on the next
Okay.
slide.
Any questions on the student?
Yeah,
before
before
move
we.
on?
I was just
move
gonna
on from
explain one thing
services.
on the award under the less than 10. The reason that it says not applicable is because a written contract is not required for under 10,000, and then that is detailed more so on the separate attachment. And this is Sherry's slide for IT.
Okay, so the IT procurement policy states that basically if it's on our standards list and it costs less than $2,500, you don't need to necessarily request approval to purchase it. So Adobe, for example, is on our standards list. Any office or department that wants to buy or purchase a copy of Adobe can do so. They should go through IT because we have a price cut because we're purchasing on an enterprise agreement. So whether or not it's on the standards list, it identifies whether or not you should go through IT or not. Our desktops, for example, our standard desktops, it's on the standards list, but you should go through IT because you get a price break if you go through us, because we buy in bulk, basically. So anytime we have an enterprise agreement, it just makes more sense to work through IT to do the purchase, though you don't need any approval to do so under $2,500. The same is true for the 2,500 to 10,000. The difference, I think, anytime it's between 2,500 and 10,000, it should get some sort of look. I would like all of them to be looked at by our security office to make sure what is being purchased has a security review, so we're not impacting our cybersecurity stature by purchasing something we shouldn't. So they look the same. To me, they look the same, but there is a policy that says under $2,500, it doesn't have to get permission if it's on the standards list. And the truth is, if it's on the standards list, it probably has been already vetted with security, so it's probably okay. So 10,000 to 50,000, it requires ITC subcommittee approval. So again, fill out that project request form, project review form, submit it to IT. We do our internal review. Is it part of our standard infrastructure? For example, we don't run out and buy Macs because we don't support Macs. iOS desktops, and then we review it for security. Once we do the review, it goes to the ITC subcommittee where it gets reviewed to make sure it follows all the other policies, and it doesn't impact any collective bargaining agreements. So it's HR, Robin, and the internal auditor that go and they review those requests to checks and balances to make sure.
So the ITC subcommittee, the things that we're reviewing for is, did the office or department who wants to purchase this thing, software usually, did they think about what they really need? Did they set their list of requirements? Or did they just see something cool at a trade show, you know, which we try to get people to avoid. Or even if they did see something cool at the trade show, we want them to do their due diligence to ensure that that cool software they saw is really gonna meet the needs of the county. So that's one of the first questions that we ask. And then, do they have the budget for it? How are they gonna pay for it? Does it have ongoing cost impacts? Do they need to go to the board for budget approval? Have they followed the procurement process? What type of process do they need to follow to buy this thing? Have they been doing that? Will it affect staff? Which is why Maria is a member of the committee. And as Sherry said, is it gonna have a union impact? So we're looking for all those things. And then the other thing that we look for at the ITC subcommittee is this really a need of only one office or department? Or is there possibly a county-wide use for this thing? And if there is a county-wide use, do we already have software over here that we could use to meet this need without buying something new? Or is there office or department where maybe this software is not quite right, but there's another software that'll meet everybody's needs? So we're looking for all of those things. And I know that the offices and departments think that that's a hurdle that slows them down, but really it's we're taking a broader look for the good of the county. And if we see a potential for county-wide, then we kick it up to the ITC full committee that has membership from throughout the county, where we can have a larger discussion. But usually these are small things that are pretty localized use. And it's not a big deal to just kick them through, but sometimes it's something big.
And we do want to make sure that it's really going to solve the problem they're trying to solve, or that they've properly identified the problem they're trying to solve. Because sometimes trade shows are a great example, or something somebody used at another location where they worked and it was cool and solved all their problems. But we want to make sure it fits in with our infrastructure, that we can support it, because all the trade shows say you'll never need IT support, but that is never true. And if it has any sort of integration with our existing infrastructure, we need to know that as well. If it integrates with Outlook, we may or may not be able to support that. So there's a lot of things that we're wanting to review before people just go purchase a piece of software or hardware. It's not as common with hardware, but.
Commissioner McGee has a question for you.
Oh.
Commissioner McGee.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Okay, I want to let, if Commissioner Edwards or Commissioner Menzer have questions first. I have a couple of questions about this.
No, I don't have any questions.
No, you're good.
My question is in regards, and so how did we, right? Like, it seems like in theory, the checks and balances are supposed to be there. But recently, right, with just several recent trends, I haven't really seen that checks and balances, and I've seen, sorry, I accidentally muted myself, but instead I'm seeing almost like a lot of rogue systems coming through, right? And then the impact is on Sherry's office, where they have to figure out how it's going to integrate with the rest of the systems. And then, so that's my first question. And my second question is there a part in the procurement policy where we talk about the impact to stakeholders, right? Like, maybe if, for example, there was, we saw it last budget season with the system that, public defense and the prosecutor's office did, and the prosecutor office got like a systems person to help them kind of do the data management, and then public defense couldn't, and so it was a budget request. And there was like no kind of foresight on that. And, I think another example is we saw it again with the body cams, right? And the impact that it would create in terms of iCloud database with the prosecutor and public defense. But, there's other examples, Sherry, that you're familiar with. And so I'm wondering, like, where is it actually where those checks and balances really come through, and kind of we tighten things up so we're not seeing these kind of delayed requests for later impacts.
So I'd like to take those excellent examples kind of one at a time. I think that we have seen a lot of offices and departments recently, like within the last year, going out and purchasing things without checking in first. Not only in the area of IT, but also in facilities and goods and certain services. And I would like to give them the benefit of the doubt and chalk it up to not being aware of our policies. So Rebecca's gonna talk in a few minutes about what our next steps are as far as training. And hopefully, training will address a large part of this, these issues that we're having. In as
Can
far.
I butt in? Robin?
Please.
And I appreciate, I guess, the kindness, and saying, right, that, but for me, these policies have been in place, and, I've noticed that kind of the places where it's happened, right, it's nothing new, and I just don't see how, again, these things are happening without any like checks or balances, and then the impact is coming back, to the general fund.
Yes.
And so for me, sure, education is a piece of it, but the other piece of it is just, I feel like it's just, blatant just disregard for what the policy is, and that's my concern.
Right on point, and I think if what you're saying is how we can enforce a policy in the county, and whether it's this procurement policy in any type of policy. And the enforcement policy within the departments, I think is a somewhat of a straight line to make sure the directors follow the policy. With elected offices becomes a little bit of an issue and a challenge as to how we enforce policy. The Board of County Commissioners have approved for all county offices and departments, so it is a challenge, and I think you outlined it very well, Commissioner, Madam Chair, that continues to be a challenge, and I do believe that is a gap.
I think a lot of time, the vendors of some of these IT solutions convince the people who want to purchase them that they don't require any IT involvement. And that's never the case. So they kind of, AWS, for example, they have this whole lift and shift promotion. We can just lift it and shift it, and not knowing, the people who are being sold this solution, they don't understand that that's not ever really gonna happen. And so sometimes I think they move forward believing that they aren't gonna need any IT support. The body cams, for example, when I found out that those had gotten approved, I went to the sheriff's office and I said, why did you guys do this without even talking to us? And they said, well, we don't need any IT support. That's what the salespeople tell them, and it's not true. I mean, we spent months getting those body cams.
So who's on the
out.
hook for that? Then if the salespeople lie to the purchaser,
They're just,
is there litigation that can be brought back against the vendor?
no.
Cause it's nowhere in writing or what?
I imagine, I mean, I wasn't
I mean,
involved in the
it's-
At
purchase,
that point,
so.
we've bought the
We
thing
want the-
and we need to make
want
it work.
Yeah.
And somebody signed the end user license agreement, then it's
Yeah.
probably in there.
I mean, there are things we could do. For example, if you really wanted to play hardball and an officer of the county, elected or appointed, signed a contract in violation of county policy, the Board of County Commissioners could notify the vendor that the contract is invalid as a violation of policy. We could get caught up in legal proceedings. It's not worth it. The fallout with the official you could deal with, but it's just not worth it at that point as staff to attempt to that's really your only recourse. As, you know, there's no penalties involved in this. You could tell an office or department, well, you've spent $80,000 on something you weren't supposed to, we'll just cut that out of your budget. To what end? I mean, truly, there's staff catch it as we can. And when we do, we attempt to divert them from the path they're on back onto the policy process that they're supposed to follow. But there's only so much we can do.
So there's a dot missing for me here. I understand the concern Commissioner Mejia has described. But what policy is being violated? Like, it seems to me like in the example with body cam, they would have had to go through the IT subcommittee.
And they didn't.
And that's what that's for, right? You would have, I mean, where's the policy that captures what I call collateral impacts, you know? The fact that, let's take e-prosecutor, you know, that was one that Commissioner Mejia brought up. It's like, okay, great system, we need this, and then we buy it, and then like 6 months later, or 3 months later, or whatever, it's like, oh, we need a staffer here, we need staff here, we need staff here. Like, what policy, who violated what policy? How is that being caught?
That's not a policy violation, and I was gonna unpack 3 great examples that Commissioner Mejia laid out. That was the second one, the ongoing impact once we purchase these systems. And I accept responsibility, when we should catch that as we do the review in the ITC subcommittee and in the budget process. When we purchase a system, and at this point, Sherry and her team, I've talked to them about it, and I've talked to the budget team, and I've had conversations with my central services hat on with Jennifer Walker, how when we bring a project or a purchase to the board, that we not only need to think about the one-time cost, but we also need to think about those ongoing costs. And when it comes to software, what you should start to see in the budget conversations is, here's the upfront cost, and at this point, this is what we think we'll need in support. We did not do that well in the past. That's not a policy violation, and as a process improvement, we need to get better at that in the budget process. So that's where
At
that
this
comes
level,
in.
because I think it starts at the ITC committee to
Yes,
start vetting the needs, not just the initial purchase, but the long term.
right.
And also the IT committee and eventually comes to the board as recommendations, a full package. There has been a gap, and we're trying to address that as we.
Who's representing the IT committee? I mean, who's all on that?
So
committee?
the IT subcommittee is Robin, Maria, Brandon, and Diana Benson.
Yep.
And the IT committee,
Mhm.
I chair, the county manager chairs that committee, and there's representatives from every single office and department
On the IT
at the
committee.
IT committee. Everybody comes.
So everybody's on, at the game.
Yeah.
Yep,
And
yep.
then what, I guess I'm trying to figure out what happened on this particular incident. It just was not brought to the IT committee, and so nobody knew anything about it?
And the incident being Axum?
Those camera business that were
It
happening,
never went through
body
the
cameras,
IT
no.
committee.
just
No,
didn't
the
go at
body
all.
cameras, no, the sheriff didn't bring that forward.
And when did that take place? Like in the middle of last
Year ago?
year or something?
It was a year ago, yeah. It was nearing the end of
And
spending
that's
or
where a
something.
vendor
Yeah.
said, won't need it, so
Yeah.
they didn't come.
Well, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as we move away from an on-premise solution to a software as a service solution. The sales people will tell you, and the idea is that you don't need as many people to support it because it's software as a service, it's in the cloud, you don't need that, but that's not true. And I think it's a growing pain, and it's a learning experience for Thurston County to realize that it doesn't even require less support, and in some cases, it's going to require more because you have to have formalized processes for ongoing support, whereas in the past, we upgraded Munis when we had time, and in the Oracle world, we upgrade quarterly whether we want to or not. So I think just not realizing the impact that moving to a different way of doing business was gonna have.
And maybe let's take the body cams outside. And Robin stated sometimes used to purchase pieces of software just based on the bells and whistles that we see at a conference. And the bells and whistles, and some of the vendors can say, you don't need IT support. Because you can just plug this standalone application, and that's all these wonderful things for you in your office. What is happening, I think what Sherry is explaining is that standalone doesn't survive in a county system. Because how we're gonna be bringing to consolidate and making sure that talks to the rest of the system in the county we use, that is the issue. And that is when IT needs to be understanding, it's not just plugging a software in a computer. It's how that a piece of software is gonna be talking with the rest of the system, IT system in the county. And that's where we find that missing piece.
Right, another recent example is the state of Washington is upgrading the Odyssey system for the courts. IT was brought in very late in the game. We had huge concerns that it would impact, the administrator of the court was saying, oh, this is not gonna impact anything else you do, with absolutely no recognition that to maintain Odyssey requires interfaces with other systems that the court uses. We contacted AOC and some of their key people came, met with our IT folks, and we determined what's really happening here. It's not at this time an upgrade of the Odyssey system, but only a small piece of it. So this thing that they're about to do is not going to have a huge impact, but what they're planning to do a year or so from now will have impact. So we stressed with them the need to not only contact the clerk, but to ensure that they involve our IT department, not only in our county, but in all counties across the state. So things must integrate, and that's one of the biggest impacts on IT, integration.
I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, I'm trying to get us up to speed on the video work
Video-
sites, inspections, video inspections.
Yeah.
And that seems like we just can't ever get there. So is
the-
that
what the-
because
what
one
the
thing won't coordinate with
What the
another?
prosecutor and the public defense.
No,
can-
no.
No, he's talking about permitting.
Oh, building,
Permitting.
got it.
And it just seems like we can't ever get there because we're trying to interface something else.
Right, because it's, right now, and what he's saying is the Amanda system doesn't allow it to do that. It's limited. So the new piece of software that we're working, the Acela.
Yeah.
Is gonna have a full integration with the rest of the system, and it's gonna streamline that process.
But there is
Yeah,
the
but if it's your
services
network-
available now.
I was gonna
Seems
say,
like
what, I
couple
get
of
confused,
years.
cause I keep hearing we've done 75 e-inspections or something, so how are those happening if?
Well, but it's not integrated. It's not integrated. That's what Commissioner Edwards says. It's not integrated to the system, and they can send via email and but download the email. We look at it as opposed to attach those to an application itself in the system. That's
It's
what,
more of a cumbersome.
yeah, it's more cumbersome, which is, it's more labor hours.
I don't want that, yeah.
Very
So-
manual process, yeah.
See, all that is streamlining of the process, really what we're looking for with a new Acela. All
What
integrated,
did you call it?
Acela.
Acela
Acela.
is the new software.
ACCELA,
It's the repl-
ACCELA.
Acela. It's the replacement for Amanda.
Okay, I don't know.
But we've been working on that for about 3 years now, haven't we?
We have been working for a long time. When
5
COVID
years.
hit,
Five.
when COVID hit,
Since I've
we
been on the
took a
board.
pause.
Still,
Well, there was a lot of pre-work done before we obtained Acela in trying to get the requirements right. And then there were a few other steps. We took a pause when COVID hit from all our large IT purchases. Once we got started again, it was back to the requirements, and then the bidding process
Contract
was
negotiations took
long, the
forever.
initial vendor, we couldn't come to an agreement for a contract with. I mean,
And
this
we went with the
has
second
had
better.
a big, you know, all these bazillion little steps in this
Were all
process
these-
map, yep,
Who's the vendor?
vendor.
Excella is the solution, and our implementation partner is called Avocet.
And so we are actively engaged in that configuration part of it, as we will kind of finalize that, get into some of the testing and then training with the hope of beginning of second quarter, I believe, next year to go live.
It's good with the active sector.
Okay, end of second quarter, just to pad that time.
Just because we
It's
know.
moving forward.
ACCE,
ELA.
one L, two Cs, one L.
Yeah.
So, not to be confused with the transit agency.
If you type it incorrectly, you get the wrong one.
Is the, what is it in
I don't
DC?
remember,
I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
Acela.
So, you know, back to the procurement part.
Commissioner Mejia, do you have any additional questions on this, or are we addressing your questions?
Yes, I'm just kind of, I guess, ready for kind of like, what are the next steps to kind of tighten our policies, right? I guess, because from my point of view, it's just, it's frustrating, right? Just having those huge budget impacts come in throughout the middle of the year, and just because, not to pick on like the prosecutors and public defense, but that's just kind of the latest example I have in my head right now. Right when they came forward and we were about to sign, I don't know how much it was. Was it $1 million?
$1 million over 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. And
Not a solution for now.
GTAC will meet.
yeah, and so that was, because again, we were asking questions, and we asked for them to go back and meet with Sherry about this, but it's at the stage where it comes to the board. I would feel like all those questions should already be answered. Like, yes, Sherry, we already spoke with Sherry, and these are the solutions that Sherry has. Like, and so that's kind of where I'm hoping that there'll be some tightening in the policy. Because I don't know, I already said this, right? I'm not really seeing a lot of checks or balances. I'm seeing that at the end of the day, the budgetary impact comes to the board, and by that point, it's usually like our hands are tied. And I just want to make sure that, it's happened really frequently lately, and I don't want to be caught in that situation, because we don't have a little like pot of money aside, right? Like so I think I've made my point. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next slide then.
Got about 6 minutes.
Okay, the next one is on just a few items of the exceptions to the bidding process that we were mentioning earlier. For example, the co-op contracts where they are already formally competed with a greater outreach.
Also known as piggyback.
Yeah, you've heard
Yes.
us call it piggyback.
Yeah, through other agencies, and so they have a larger vendor pool and a better volume pricing. So for us to take advantage of those contracts, we make sure that they meet the county's needs, and then also follow our own procurement policy based on the thresholds that we just described. So
You're
that,
very familiar with sole source.
yeah,
And
okay, so,
waiver.
Yep.
okay, so we can skip those.
Yep.
The 2024 changes due to the SB 5268, down towards the bottom there. Under the 150,000, the direct buy with equitable distribution or solicit quotes from all contacts on the roster. So meaning they just ask that you rotate the vendors that you use so that you're not constantly using the same vendor repetitively for under that threshold. And then 150,000 to 350, invite quotes from all contacts on that roster.
So that's a move from just having 3 or 4, it's just all they have those potential services has to bid on. Okay.
So those are the small amount of changes that are coming to the roster. And then like we said earlier, that they're just gonna make sure that it's, as I noted at the top, they're gonna provide this universal small works roster for Washington state agencies and municipalities, so that we're all kind of working from that same pool. And then here we are with the procurement policy training, which I think that will help answer some questions. And I would like to do this in coordination with Sherry as well, so that we can incorporate the IT policy training for awareness for those departments and offices that have their staff that are handling contracts and procurements. So we'll meet with the stakeholders to discuss the training needs, prepare training presentations on the procurement and IT policy and procedures, and then receive feedback from the stakeholders, and then finalize our presentation, and then we would have the department offices designate who needs to attend, and then we'd like project managers to attend as well, because those two things really go hand in hand. There's oftentimes where I'm doing project management stuff and sometimes they're doing contract stuff. So it's just helpful to be really knowledgeable on the full process. And then we would have the procurement contracts unit would schedule multiple live. I think most people prefer online, but we would be, set them up so that we're teaching them live instead of a video recording. Sessions for staff to participate in our procurement and contracts training. And then I would like to do a quiz at the end just to really test, the knowledge that they're gaining and making sure they're understanding, and and have them provide any feedback if there's, how we can make improvements, or if there's anything that maybe we didn't cover that's a situation they've come across.
One of the things that we could do that is within the purview of the board is mandate procurement training for anyone who's going to do procurement. The board sets those trainings that are mandatory for staff. This is something that you could consider, is making this training mandatory before someone can, especially when we get the ERP system up and running, before someone has approval authority in the system, they would have had to have taken this training. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, and for example, I've seen where if they haven't taken the training, then their name is not allowed to be on the contract as a contact person, overseeing that work. And then that list can be maintained where in the contracts department, we can verify, hey, if your name's not on the list, then I'm sorry, you need to give me someone from your department who has taken the training, or get the training done before this contract starts.
What about the possibility of having, because everything, and I'm gonna go back to this body cam thing as the example, because I guess that's a bad example to point to maybe, or it's a good example of a bad example. But why couldn't we ask that department directors or elected officials, before something is paid for, that there's a box on there, I don't know, to check that somehow it's been reviewed by whom? I don't know. It looks like it'd be a pretty simple process, but if the reviewer's on vacation or whatever, or something that runs into problems, I suppose, but I'm just trying to think about a simple way to keep it from happening again without.
To some extent, this is a byproduct of a decentralized organization. And this is an option, the county could structure itself where all purchasing was done by a purchasing office.
Like central
And
purchasing.
yep,
Yes.
you could have a central purchasing office where no office or department could buy anything. That would not be a popular thing in this county. Our culture is extremely decentralized. So I think it's on us to ensure that the people who are doing these things know the rules. And we can do that through training and enforcing these things when we see them happening.
I guess how do you get around the vendor saying, well, this doesn't take any support, you know?
We can't control the vendors.
No, I know we can't, but I'm talking about the agency director,
Right.
whomever it is, taking that person's word for it and then moving it right on through.
And that's a good point. I think the purpose of having the ITC subcommittee is exactly that, but it takes initiative.
Somebody's gotta bring it in front of them.
Exactly,
Right.
it
They
takes
don't bring it in
initiative to
front of
bring
them, it
this, to
doesn't get
have a
done.
conversation and ask the questions, whether this software is good, bad, or indifferent.
I mean, I can get down to simpleton examples, like a rechargeable flashlight. Well, you could say that's electronic, but it's not gonna affect anything else, you know? But a camera, well, you think of it as a camera, and the person says it's not gonna affect anything, but it really does affect a magnitude of, you know, unbelievably different than an electric flashlight,
Absolutely.
you know?
I don't understand, how did I mean, it's information technology, there's the policies here, it had to go to ITC subcommittee, like, the vendor can tell me anything, but why would I think
Right.
that it wouldn't have to have gone through ITC
Well,
subcommittee?
that's what why we want to do the training to create awareness. And then also have a SharePoint page, which we've already started as a one-stop shop for people to go and get their resources for the most current template, so everybody's using the same forms with the terms and conditions that are vetted by our legal, and then also can
next
find the
steps.
policies and procedures there, so everybody will start to pass along the word that like, this is where you go to find out that information, so that they're not just trying to listen to these outside sources. Hey, I need to go to the county's site for procurements and contracts.
We need to create better awareness. That's, and again, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to our offices and departments, who should know what the policies are. But we'll make sure that they know what the policies are, and then when these things come up,
Also,
it's.
hopefully bringing awareness.
Well,
When-
I would like to add language onto that policy, right? That if they are disregarding the procurement and IT policy, that, they're holding the bag for it. I don't want any budget request and the board having to go in and save them from something that, was outside of our radar, what's outside of, IT's radar. For me, that's, I'm kind of more of a, if we're gonna do the trainings and everything, I think there needs something there at the end where, if they still decide to disregard the policy, then they're gonna be, their office or department is going to have to like find a way to pay for it. But it's not gonna be through a request from the board.
We can certainly put that in the next update of the procurement policy. We'll find some language to put in there and run that past the board. We do intend to update the policy in 2024 for any changes in state and federal laws. And there's a few other little things that we think will make it better in the county, and we will add that. The other thing that we might consider, that is up to the Board of County Commissioners, you could ask for an internal audit of purchasing practices across the county. Because it would be a extremely appropriate thing to do, especially considering that we know that the state auditor is focused on purchase policies and procedures. And one of the things that the state auditor tests for is, are our offices and departments following our own county policy? So if Brandon were to do a countywide audit on that, he may come up with some, identify some gaps and offer some solutions that we might not think about.
I've seen some agencies also do like a form that's unauthorized purchase when they find that somebody, a department has done that. And then depending on the level of risk, depends on how far up the chain they have to get signatures on that form and explain what they're gonna do next time to prevent that.
When you're talking about things like, you said something earlier about MRSP,
MRSC.
yeah, that they are the recognized, I don't know, referee? I'm trying to think of a term that you said so we follow them and you say the state follows what they recommend as well?
They offer a roster of vendors that we use to purchase from,
Yeah, but
and
what
the
about
state
the policy
recognizes
part?
that. As far as policy, MRSC does some excellent training around procurement. When I hire, like, each of our most recent project managers, I had them attend the training series that MRSC offers on public works and procurement, so that they could come up to speed on what the state rules are and then get familiar with our own county policies.
So when the auditor comes in and does an audit and what, as long as we're following what
You have to follow,
what MSRP says,
well.
then we're okay? Is that what
No,
you're saying?
No, the state auditor is auditing, are we following federal, state, and county procurement policies? MRSC is an advisor, if you will. They publish information, they work very closely with the state auditor to make sure that the information that's available to local jurisdictions is good and easy to read and easy to consume. They are a fabulous resource, but the auditor is auditing to, are we following the laws and rules?
The MRSC doesn't provide that type of protection.
No, they do legal advice
Well,
if the
then
prosecutor
You
asks
made
them.
mention that our legal people gave you a legal opinion that we're okay
Yes.
to
The-
skip I don't know if you wanna call
We
it skip.
didn't skip the policy, that the
You didn't have to
procedure
fit-
that we
it
followed was
says-
good.
In our policy, it says, you have to have a bid for leasing real property. This is
It's not
real.
exactly what our policy says, no,
Doesn't?
but,
Right.
and
Yeah,
we
it
can-
says leasing real
right.
or personal property by
This
the county.
particular building, if this is what you're talking about, will be the subject of a state audit very soon. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that in this room. We're over time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, can we stop screen sharing? Thank you. Yeah, it is 10:09. So are there any additional questions or comments before we adjourn?
Not just next steps, you will see some revisions to the policy, including your suggestions and including some of the alignments to state law sometime next year.
We also
Thank
want to
you.
say how much we appreciate the board's interest in this topic and your support. Staff work very hard to ensure that these policies are followed, and the backing of the board means a lot.
Very informative, I guess.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
the board is gonna be in the position to ask, do you follow the I2C subcommittee recommendations?
Yes?
Okay, so thank you. It is 10. Shoot, it is 10:10. We are adjourned.
Mhm.